Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight, Mindfields once again. I think we're up to number 149 tonight. And tonight, I'm going to take on a kind of a heavy subject. So, fasten your seatbelts and enjoy if you can. Pay attention because I think we're gonna get deep. We're gonna get deep into the roots of some questions that I've been trying to ask properly, trying to understand. How is it? How can somebody do what what they do? And I'm speaking about, in particular, something that made me quite angry was when I found out finally that the CDC has uh, discredited the test, and I don't know how specific I can be, but the so-called test to see if you have the so-called bug, um, it goes by three letters, and it was invented way back in the 50s by a man named, uh, well, I think 50s, anyway, a long time ago, by a man named Carrie Mullis, who you've probably heard of, who has been played on videos where he says that you cannot use this test to do diagnosis. With his test, but nevertheless, it didn't stop people. And one person in particular that it didn't stop is a doctor by the name of Dr. Christian Drosten, Drosten. And so I started to look into Dr. Drosten. Why? Because he's the one that, upon knowing that of Snohomish County Man, and you remember Snohomish County Man, right? We've talked about him with Mark and Andy and everybody, George, the the ephemeral Chinese traveler that has no name, who's no photograph, and supposedly he's the very first of this particular quote unquote disease to enter the United States, as far as we know. And that was the trigger, once that he was certified that this was a new novel, you know what, CV, that it was a new one, that it was, that triggered immediately. I mean, immediately, Dr. Drosten to take the PCR test that was not supposed to be used for diagnosis and to modify it to do diagnosis of that same exact disease that starts with a V, that was supposedly a brand new V, a novel entity. That's right, Corky, brought into this country by somebody who's disappeared. But that record is what was enough to convince this doctor, Dr. Christian Drosten, to go into overdrive and produce a modification of the PCR process, which he then turned into a diagnostic test and immediately got EUA, emergency use authorization, from the FDA, and it became the diagnostic tool for millions and millions and millions of people. Hey, Jojo, I'm glad you're here. Corky, ECAT, Robert, Being, and Jay, and Christy, and all, and everybody. Thanks for being here. I do appreciate it. Happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas. And we look forward to a good new year. So let's keep going. I'm gonna go kind of deep tonight, as I said before, into the philosophy behind the idea that a person should modify something that's not intended for that purpose and then pass it off as effective diagnostic tool, of which it is accepted on an emergency basis and then used for almost 2 years before the CDC pulls the plug on it. And there's been tons and tons of criticism of this supposedly diagnostic tool, and tons of reasons why it shouldn't be relied upon. And nevertheless, has been right up to now. Why? Because it's cheap, it's easy, and it's something that they have had basically off the shelf. I think he took 2 days, maybe 3 days to do his modification, whatever it was. Okay, so anyway, Dr. Christian Drosten is the head of virology at the principal hospital in Berlin, Germany, and therefore one of certainly the most important hospitals anywhere, and certainly in Europe. And it is called the Charité, a, uh, a French word of a hospital that was named a long time ago, back in the 1700s, and saw some service over the years, was turned into, um, well, it went through various stages, but by World War II, it was a university hospital, Humboldt University, and the Free University of Berlin, and it and Humboldt joined together to become Charité. Now, the important thing is that this is on the grounds that used to be the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. And the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute is where the eugenics research was done and financed in part by the Rockefellers. And we've read about that in Daniel Okrent's book, The Guarded Gate, in which he traces the history of eugenics. And we went through it in quite some detail. And as you may remember from my reading the book, a lot of those German doctors spent a lot of time at the Rockefeller University or the Rockefeller um, Medical Center, whatever it was called, in the 30s. Yeah, the ones that ended up in the Nazis, some of them studied under the Rockefeller Institute in the United States. Well, they went to Germany, and of course, there was medical experimentation, and there was genocide, and there was murder, and there was all sorts of things that went on in hospitals. And let me just talk about this history that's recently been dug up, if you don't mind my using the term. And let me just read this to you. This is the Berliner Zeitung, the Berlin magazine. It is from June 6th of 2021. And here is the text. Berlin, on the 1st of July 2014, construction workers were digging a small trench on the campus of Berlin's Free University, and Free University is part of the Charité, and came across a strange pit filled to the brim with human bones. The foreman called the police. They sent Commissioner R with an initial they don't identify in the article here, who in turn informed the FU, that's Free University President's office, photographed the human remains and had them transferred to the Institute of Forensic Medicine at Charité Hospital. The forensic experts examined the find from the Garystrasse 39 incident site and came to the following conclusions on July 17th. Quote, about 250 liters of bone fragments were recovered in 7 paper bags, are mostly of human origin from both children and adults. They had been in the ground for several decades. In addition, 10 round plastic tags of different colors with different handwritten numbers were found among the bones. All this pointed to a horrific explanation and a link to Auschwitz. Dr. Joseph Mengele, who performed medical research at the Nazi death camp between 1943 and 44, had supplied the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Human Genetics, Anthropology, and Eugenics, at the time located on the FU campus, with countless human specimens. They mostly came from Jewish men, women, and children whom the doctor had examined alive and then had murdered for research purposes. Mengele and his former boss and doctoral supervisor, Professor Otmar von Verscheuer, it just hit me with an ad that I couldn't get rid of. Sorry. Mengele and his former boss and doctoral supervisor, Professor Otmar von Verscheuer, Otmar von Verscheuer, who headed the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology and Eugenics, called the bones, eyes, blood samples, and organs of the murdered, hundreds of which were sent from Auschwitz to Berlin, mostly in 1944, as scientific material. At the time, Verscheuer, Mengele, and others conducted research on twins, hip dislocation, club feet, and short stature in children, quote, with physical abnormalities. They were interested in all kinds of unanswered questions about genetics and heredity. The FU president back in 2014, Peter Andre Alt, and his staff were familiar with the history, but the police and the forensic doctors were not. The FU leadership deliberately, semi-deliberately, or negligently failed to inform both the agencies involved and the public of the likely implications of the discovery. As I suspect, the FU's pursuit of the title Excellence University was more important than much else at the time. Words like Mengele, murdered Jews, and Auschwitz were considered inappropriate in this context. By now, at the latest, the university's top management should have been alarmed and ordered further investigations. Instead, the bones were left lying around carelessly for months until on December 12, 2014, when they were unceremoniously burned in the Ruhleben crematorium and buried anonymously next to a basement window of the crematorium. The plaster casts of human limbs that were also found disappeared without a trace. Suppression of history. The ignorant inaction of the Free University's president became public knowledge in the beginning of 2015. First, the Tagesspiegel newspaper exposed the scandal. The Berliner Zeitung followed suit. A tight-lipped statement by the FU's president's office spoke of gaps in communication. Okay. The article goes into great detail, and I won't share any more of it than that. It's called Bones Discovered on FU Campus. All Evidence Points to Auschwitz. June 6, 2021, in the Berliner Zeitung. So, this is the place where Christian Drosten works. For whom does Christian Drosten work? Let's turn to something which I do wish to share with you, if you don't mind. This is going to be, let's see, a presentation by the president or I guess the dean is what you would call it, of the Charité hospital. His name is Detlev Ganten, Ganten. And this, I think, this is what got me kind of agitated when I saw it on Saturday, and I was going to do a show on it. So this is the show. Okay, let's get this one started. Okay. Now, what this is a presentation by the World Health. It's called Forum, and is organized by the Charité Hospital. And they have created a consortium of hospitals that's called the M8 Alliance, and that's centered around the Charité. And this particular seminar is happening in 2020, so it's during the pandemic, and it's happening in Iran, on Kish Island in Iran. And it is kicked off by the Iranian representative.
A very, very close and dear first distinguished speaker is Professor Detlev Ganten. Detlev is, first of all, a very, very close and dear mentor of mine. He is known to everybody in global health. Detlev Ganten is the professor of medicine and pharmacology. He received his MD in 1975 and was appointed professor at the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Heidelberg. He's a founding director and president of the Max Delbruck Center for Molecular Medicine in Berlin. And in 1993, he became director of the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at Benjamin Franklin Medical Center of the Free University of Berlin. He had held a number of senior positions.
Okay, I'm going to stop him because he goes on for a number of minutes, and I'm going to skip forward to the presentation. But just to make a note, if you see the flag behind this gentleman, who is an Iranian doctor at Tehran University Medical System, TUMS, it's called, TUMS. This is one of the strongest alliances that Charité has in its M8 program, and that's where they are. They're actually in Iran talking about world health problems. And I thought it was fascinating to see that flag behind him that appears to have two eights on it, looks like an 8-8. And in fact, that is the flag of TUMS, the Tehran University Medical System. And it goes back a long time. And there has been an association with Germany for a long time. And I don't know if the 88 means anything, but it sure is kind of freaky when you think about it.
Than Detlev Ganten can speak about partnership because he is the master behind establishing one of the main platforms in global health, which is globally for partnership and bringing the institutions and individuals together. Professor Detlev Ganten, the floor is yours, please.
Now, Professor Detlev Gansen has been the leader that put together the M8 Alliance and is now going to make a very boring presentation about how we all need to work together to solve world health. And it's we need the most important thing of all the sustainable development goals of the UN, which you guys don't know about, but there is this thing called sustainable development you've heard of, and there's 17 goals that are supposed to be met, and number 17 is cooperation. They're working on cooperation. Let me go ahead and let Mr. Detlev Ganten come in and say what I want him to say, and then we'll be done with.
Thank you, Amir. It's a great pleasure.
Oh,
I did.
okay. So because we can. and then first. And
Okay.
right.
All right, here we go.
So great pleasure to be with you, and you will hear a lot about COVID-19. I'm going to be a little bit more general and ask the question: what can we learn from this crisis in more general terms? And one is this crisis hits everybody without any exemption, some more, some less, and shows that we are living in one world. There are no borders. There are no borders of ideas, but there are also no borders for diseases. And this makes clear international collaboration is the name of the game, without any restrictions and without sanctions. And this is easily said, but as we know, it's not easily done.
So just to stop, you get the pitch. It's always about how healthcare is the thing that's going to have to go all around the world. It's going to have to be a universal system. And that, of course, breaks down sovereignty and borders and things. And most countries are not ready to break down their borders and give their sovereignty over to the United Nations. But that, of course, is the game. They're trying to get through whatever means necessary to get people to submit to a federal type of government run by a whole bunch of really smart people. Okay, keep going. We're getting close to the payoff here.
So we do have to work on that, and we have to have a common ground. And this common ground is the United Nations, and I add, is the family of United Nations, including WHO. There's no other place to have this collaboration being organized. And we also have to go back to basics of where we come from. And some of my colleagues know that evolution is kind of my little hobby.
Okay, hang on a second. Evolution is kind of my little hobby. Oh my God. Okay. Yes. Well, wow. All right, here we go.
So let me start really from the very basis, and that is 3.8 billion years ago. That was Big Bang. And then 4.5 billion years ago, long time ago, the Earth originated. And then 3.5 billion years ago, took 1 billion years that life started. And the first life was not man, was RNA viruses.
Okay. I don't know if you guys' jaws dropped like mine did when I heard that for the first time. So let's just drink this moment in here. It's 2020. The pandemic is raging. The proposed medication involves using the technique of going inside of cells using a V to get in. So the whole science of what they're doing evolves around the idea that a virus, a generic virus, is the fundamental building block of the disease. But now we're being told by the dean of the Charité, which is the hospital that's organizing all the other hospitals around the world. And believe me, they've got all the corporate sponsorship with the UN and the World Health Organization and all the pharmaceuticals. They're all lined up as sponsors of this organization. It really is just organized in order to put into effect, hopefully, the the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular with regard to health. And this whole thing is under the supervision of a man who believes that the first life was an RNA virus. Now, how could it be that he would know that? And it's not a there's hardly anybody that agrees with him on that. I've looked around to try to find people, where did life start? But what troubles me is that the idea that if they can identify this little teeny thing called a virus and say that's what started life, then they can use that as their philosophy, as that life just, kind of emerged out of this thing called an RNA virus. Where did life come from? It came from an RNA virus. Well, there's a lot of different theories, right? One of them is biological, just that we came out of the soup, the watery soup that was there after the earth cooled down from the initial chaos and the fire and the volcanoes and everything. And then there was this soupy stuff and some little bugs came out of it. As a matter of fact, that is what this account that he gave reminded me so much of Walt Disney's account that I'm actually going to play a little bit of Walt Disney's account for you too, because this goes back to 1957. And the point is, this is an elderly gentleman whose cosmology may have come from Disney. At least it's from the same generation. The Disney people were working with, Werner von Braun and all of the great, former quote unquote Nazis. And here's the question that it raises: Does someone, after the war, if he believed in the Nazi philosophy, does he suddenly become a Presbyterian like Speer supposedly did down in Texas? I don't think so. I think that's all fake. I think they still have their beliefs. And let's consider this is at the Charité, which is at the location where the eugenics lab, the eugenic experiments. How far away is this Detlef Ganten from those days, working at a place where the university itself resists digging up the bones because they don't want the publicity? They haven't changed their attitude, is what I draw from that article. Their attitude hasn't changed. Yeah, it's like the cosmos according to Disney. All right, let me play a little bit of that for you because it's kind of fun. I'm starting in the middle of it here.
Now the warm primordial sea is the cradle of life. Here are gathered all the elements of nature from which life will emerge. One of these elements, found throughout the universe, is carbon, first link in the chain of living things. The carbon atom is unique, for it alone combines with itself and other elements in millions of intricate structures to form the complex molecules of organic compounds. In the slow course of time, some are transformed into proteins, the foundation of all life. These microscopic particles join with other elements to produce millions of delicate combinations. Most are destroyed, but a few of the strongest survive. Now, with time as the main ingredient, evolution of life is inevitable. Eventually, from the complex forces of nature emerges the first organism, the first living cell, a microscopic speck of jelly able to grow and reproduce with great speed. As the eternal process of change continues, some cells group together in colonies, and from these evolve blue-green algae, the first primitive plants. In shallow pools, the chlorophyll of these plants converts the energy of sunlight into living tissue. For the first time, great quantities of precious oxygen are released, making possible ever higher forms of life. Ages roll by. The first minute cells of animal life appear, dependent on oxygen from the plants to survive. In the millions of centuries that follow, an infinite variety of plant and animal life begins to unfold. Endless adaptation, constant change, infinite variation through inconceivable lengths of time. At last, from the maternal sea, life emerges ready to challenge the hostile forces of a new environment. The pageant of living things spreads across the face of the land. Emerging during the last few seconds in the hour of time is man. Nature has created in man its most complex mechanism.
All right. I wish I could play more of these things, but I'm trying to keep the show down to an hour, but I'm trying to wrap my arms around a lot of things at once. So do bear with me. The issue that is raised is that of creation. And what I have decided is going on here is that without respect for the miracle of creation, these scientists can start thinking in very, very weird ways that goes along with the financial system, that goes along with Malthusian, and goes along with the British East India Company and the Jesuits and the Freemasons and all of the people that we've talked about that make money by speculating on money and not by investing in productive capital investments or work. This idea of there is no God, so why not do as you will? Do as thou wilt, Aleister Crowley, of course. And all of that comes from the Fabians and the desire of these elites to reduce us to serfs who are supposedly going to be happy. You know, we'll own nothing, but we'll be happy. Why will we be happy? Because we don't have to worry about anything. We just do what we're told. Yeah, right. Never's going to work. Never going to work, but they keep dreaming that they can do it. So this is about evolution, right? Evolution is his hobby, says Dr. Ganter. And evolution is the subject of the Scopes monkey trial. In 1925, the Scopes monkey trial, Dayton, Tennessee. John Thomas Scopes, a young high school science teacher accused of teaching evolution in violation of a Tennessee state law. Tennessee passed a law that said it's illegal and makes it punishable by a fine to, quote, teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible. and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. With a local businessman, Scopes had conspired to get charged with this violation, and after his arrest, the pair enlisted the aid of the ACLU to organize a defense. Hearing of this coordinated attack on Christian fundamentalism, William Jennings Bryan, the three-time Democratic presidential candidate, volunteered to assist the prosecution. So soon thereafter, the great attorney Clarence Darrow agreed to join the ACLU in the defense, and the stage was set for one of the most famous trials in history. Okay, once again, I'm not going to take the time to go through the whole trial, but what happened is the country became aware of the incredible change in life, in how we look at life, if you accept the idea of Darwinian evolution. And that puts the whole idea of the story of creation and the idea of creation in doubt. So with 20 minutes left, I can do some more of what I wanted to do. Let me go to this article. This is called The Role of Darwinism in Nazi Racial Thought. So here's where I'm trying to pull together the little threads that I've tossed out earlier in the show, okay? Is there still lingering among the medical profession that kind of cold, anti-creationist kind of a bean counter mentality that is able to regard human life as simply part of life generally and not anything special, not anything endowed by its creator with anything in particular that wasn't given to all of nature? And are we not all struggling in that great survival of the fittest contest? So I'm going to read some of this. It's called The Role of Darwinism in Nazi Racial Thought by Richard Weickhart, Weikart. It's published in German Studies Review, volume 36.3 in 2013 by the German Studies Association. Historians disagree about whether Nazis embraced Darwinian evolution. By examining Hitler's ideology, the official biology curriculum, the writings of Nazi anthropologists, and Nazi periodicals, we find that Nazi racial theorists did indeed embrace human and racial evolution. They not only taught that humans had evolved from primates, but they believed that Aryan, or the Nordic race, had evolved to a higher level than the other races because of the harsh climatic conditions that influenced natural selection. They also claimed that Darwinism underpinned specific elements of Nazi racial ideology, including racial inequality, the necessity of the racial struggle for existence, and collectivism. Many historians recognize that Hitler was a social Darwinist, and some even portray social Darwinism as a central element of Nazi ideology. Why then do some historians claim that Nazis did not believe in human evolution? George Moss argued that human evolution was incompatible with Nazi ideology because Nazis stressed the immutability of the German race. More recently, Peter Bowler and Michael Ruse have argued that the Nazis rejected human evolution because they upheld a fixed racial type and racial inequality. Nowhere is this irony more pronounced than in the work of Daniel Gassman, who claimed that Hitler built his ideology on the social Darwinist ideas of Ernst Haeckel, but simultaneously argued that the Nazis rejected human evolution. How is it possible to embrace social Darwinism while rejecting Darwinism? Anne Harrington suggests that the Nazis liked some elements of Darwinism, especially the struggle for existence, but not human evolution. Robert Richards agrees, claiming that the Nazi racial ideas, quote, were rarely connected with specific evolutionary conceptions of the transmutation of species, even though they bandied about the term, quote, struggle for existence. In another essay, he went further, arguing that Hitler and the Nazis completely rejected biological evolution. The notion that the Nazis could embrace racial struggle without believing in evolution seems plausible at first, especially since Houston Stewart Chamberlain, a forerunner of Nazi racial ideology, embraced this position. However, the claim that the Nazis did not believe in the transmutation of species and human evolution runs aground once we examine Nazi racial ideology in detail. In this essay, I examined the following evidence to demonstrate overwhelmingly that Nazi racial thinkers embraced human and racial evolution. Number one, Hitler believed in human evolution. Number two, the official Nazi school curriculum prominently featured biological evolution, including human evolution. Number three, Nazi racial anthropologists, including SS anthropologists, uniformly endorsed human evolution and integrated evolution into their racial ideology. Number five, Nazi periodicals, including those on racial ideology, embraced human evolution. And number five, Nazi materials designed to inculcate the Nazi worldview among SS and military men promoted human evolution as an integral part of the Nazi worldview. While examining these lines of evidence, I will highlight the ways that Nazi racial thought was shaped by Darwinism. First, almost all Nazi racial theorists believed that humans had evolved from primates. Second, they provided evolutionary explanations for the development of different human races, including the Nordic or Aryan race. These two terms were used synonymously. Specifically, they believed that the Nordic race had become superior because harsh climatic conditions in North Central Europe during the Ice Ages had sharpened the struggle for existence, causing the weak to perish and leaving only the most vigorous. Third, they believed that the differential evolutionary development of the races provided scientific evidence for racial inequality. Fourth, they held that the different and unequal human races were locked in an ineluctable struggle for existence. Fifth, they thought that the way for their own race to triumph in the struggle for existence was to procreate more prolifically than competing races and to gain more, quote, living space into which to expand. Sixth, many argued that Darwinism promoted a collectivist ideal. These 6 points derived from the view that humans and human races evolved and are still evolving through the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection profoundly impacted Nazi policy. They formed the backdrop for eugenics, killing the disabled, the quest for living space, and racial extermination. Hitler and Darwinism. In his writings and speeches, Hitler regularly invoked Darwinian concepts such as evolution, higher evolution, struggle for existence, struggle for life, and selection. In the 1937 speech, he not only expressed belief in human evolution, but also endorsed Haeckel's theory that each organism in its embryological development repeats earlier stages of evolutionary history. Hitler stated, "When we know today that the evolution of millions of years compressed into a few decades repeats itself in every individual, then this modernist art, we realize, is not modern. In his view, modern art Artists were atavistic individuals who remained at a more primitive stage of evolution. I'm not sure he's wrong about that. Evolution plays a central role in the chapter in Mein Kampf on nation and race, which was the only chapter published as a separate pamphlet, thus circulating widely. In that chapter, Hitler explains why he thinks racial mixing violates evolutionary principles. Any crossing of two beings not at exactly the same level produces a medium between the level of the two parents. This means the offspring will probably stand higher than the racially lower parent, but not as high as the higher one. Consequently, it will later succumb in the struggle against the higher level. Such mating is contrary to the will of nature for a higher breeding of all life. The precondition for this does not lie in associating superior and inferior, but in the total victory of the former. The stronger must dominate and not blend with the weaker, thus sacrificing his own greatness. Only the born weakling can view this as cruel, but he, after all, is only a weak and limited man. For if this law did not prevail, any conceivable higher evolution of organic living beings would be unthinkable. So within the past 51 minutes, I've put out a lot of things that may not easily fit together in your mind because they're new, and the idea that this philosophy of evolution as opposed to creation lingers. And the difference is when you adopt the philosophy of just some kind of evolution, whether it's biological or from a virus, from an RNA virus, as our the dean of the Charité says, or from somehow from some cosmic soup, or from chemicals, as we've been told there is this agenesis, this anti biological. Uh, I talked about it a little while on Twitter the other day. There's this theory that life could have come from chemicals without anything biological. Anyway, the point is, Disney was calling it carbon. Carbon is the basic building block, you know. Other people would say something else, maybe a gene, or the atom has been classically, or before that it was germplasm. But at this point, we have been inundated with the idea that it is a virus. That is the essential part. And if we buy that, if we accept that as the narrative, then everything can proceed along the lines of the who needs a miracle, who needs God, who needs creationism, who needs the idea that we are endowed by any special rights, that we are anything different from all the other mammals, except for we've got a bunch of stuff up in our head that we'd like to think about. But we're not the same according to the Bible. And according to most people, and most religions would say, no, a man is even as Disney said, you know, the best evolution. The evolution has proceeded to this point where the nature's most successful product, right? If we don't kill ourselves, if we don't blow up the planet, or if we don't poison ourselves like Prince Charles and them. But I can't talk about him, even though he's, God bless him, you know, rest in peace. But you saw, you know, that Olympic Games, London, where they had the crazy musical extravaganza featuring a deadly virus when all the children were in their hospital beds. If you haven't seen that, look at it. 2012 Olympics, London, the opening ceremony. The idea that humanity is not particularly important as individuals, we're just, a speck of dust on this earth that's just a small little marble going around a commonplace star in a commonplace galaxy in a universe that's full of similar galaxies. We are nothing. We're not important. We're easily manipulated. And so this is where you get into the idea of people are not smart enough to understand their choices, and we need to tell them what to do. And so we will engage the media to say everybody needs to have this medication, and you have to do it. And why do you have to do it? Well, don't ask us. We're not going to tell you. We're just telling you you have to do it. And if you don't believe the reason that we give you, well, it's just tough, because we're giving you the reason, and we're the wise people. We're the deans, we're the heads of the departments, and we can fake things because we have a license to lie, the noble lie. Where does that thinking come from? Well, we can trace it back to the early eugenicists, and in London and in Cold Spring Harbor, New York, Boston. We can trace it back to people who felt threatened by the masses, the unclean masses that came onto our shores, whether you go back to the days of the Irish, or you want to talk about the Italians or Jews or Polish. All kinds of immigrants came over, and they were all unwashed and poor, and they were a nuisance to some people. And so a philosophy developed that wow, they must be of a different human race. There's different human races. That's what Blavatsky says. And that's how they do it. That's how they did it. They said to themselves, well, we are the Nordics. We are the Aryans. We are the best of mankind. And our duty is to not intermingle with those lesser breeds of humans. And as a matter of fact, when necessary, we have the right to eliminate them, because we need more Lebensraum. That's the Nazi philosophy. When we prescribe through government orders certain medical treatments, we're following Nazi philosophy, because in Nazi Germany, your body belongs to the state just as much as it does in Russia, just as much as it does in a communist country. In the Nazi regime, the life that was important was the life of the race, the life of the Aryan race and the German nation. Not you, not an individual. You have nothing. You have no rights only except for to serve the needs of the state, which is on the march, making a better and better human being by preserving racial purity. There's no time to go into the question of whether this is a call of humanity, but I do want to leave it with that thought, because we do have to get deep to think about how is it possible that people can be so callous toward other people and impose upon them things that our constitutional rights say we don't have to have. And yet, just by virtue of having persuaded sufficient numbers of people and the Congress that this idea of being forced to take a medication that can change our lives is now real and pressing on people, especially in New York, with that crazy governor. So, I don't know if I was able to tie everything together for you tonight, but perhaps you will think about it, and something good will come to you. Because what we have to do is we have to recognize that the way that people think that would impose these vaccine thingies on children is not the way that people believe in creation could possibly think, because creation is a miracle in my mind, and it's far beyond my ability to understand it. And the idea that I might go into the teeny tiny little parts of life and change it just because I think I know better than the creator is the worst kind of, pseudoscience that I can imagine. So thanks, guys, for being with me. I'm going to wrap it up here.